Are you a real estate investor looking to sharpen your skills or a newbie looking to become one? You're in the right place. Welcome to Where Should I Invest? Real Estate Investing in Canada with your host, Sarah Larby.
Welcome, Kayla Andrade. Nice to see you again. I think you've been on the show many times. You are our advocate for landlords, for investors in Ontario. So thank you for all you do. Welcome back.
Thanks so much, Sarah, for having me on. I love being on with you.
Awesome. So what is new in 2023? So right now, as we are recording this, we're in February. What do we need to know as investors and landlords?
Get out of Ontario. I'm just joking. It's still good. It's still good. There is a little bit of movement happening within the Landlord and Tenant Board, doing their new updates to what you can file within the Landlord and Tenant Board. Is it really going to make a difference? No. You know, these are just applications, like T1 applications now could be filed through the portal. You have T5 applications that can be filed through the portal. L9 applications, which if you look at L9 is for for rent collection. So it's just bringing your tenant to the courts to get an order based on the amount owing, but not seek an eviction. Not too sure why that form even exists. And then they have the C2, which is the co-op applications for it. So when you are into co-op housing, they have a different application. So you can now file that with the Landlord and Tenant Board. But we are making some leeway with, recommendations, and we do have some meetings that are supposed to be coming up, and we're right at the forefront, and we were able to do that through everyone's opinion on what should be changed at the Landlord and Tenant Board.
Do you think that it's getting worse now? Like, I find that the delays are worse than they've ever been, or maybe it's just me, and maybe just because I'm looking into it more and more, but, has it actually gotten worse? And if somebody needs to go to the board for whatever, if it's an N12 or if it's a an N4 and they haven't, a tenant doesn't pay rent, like, what's the timeline that we're looking at now to actually get your hearing?
Well, it definitely is getting worse. If you look at how many, rental units that have been created or what type of money problems tenants are coming with, obviously that's increasing based the cost of inflation that's happening, across the country. So you're going to see more of an influx of applications, and there's only 24 hours in a day. And, it's great to see that the Landlord and Tenant Board is now trying to expand in their hearings into the weekend and evenings. But if you are bringing in those applications and you're just adjourning them because of whatever reasons, just to try to have a delay tactic that has been obviously used from professional tenants, we're not going to be able to see that improvement that is needed. So we need to look at what is actually bogging down the system and throwing millions of dollars that they have been, which stating that they've had hired 79, they have 79 full-time and part-time adjudicators, but don't give us the breakdown of how many full-time or how many part-time, but they want to put in some more funding to get 35 staff members. So this is where it's like, you can throw as many people into that as you want, but you have to start learning how to streamline certain applications in order to address that backlog, because they're still trying to address the backlog. They think it's going to be at least another year before they address the backlog. So if you're spending this much time on a backlog, what does that look like for the new applications that are coming, and especially for more N4 applications for non-payment of rent, or for applications where the landlords are fed up and they're trying to get out of this business, sell their property, and now the new owner, it wants owner occupy. So they need to give that type of applications, and we're looking at minimum 8 months at least. And people are waiting a much longer. It all depends on what area you are.
So do you think that it's the backlog from the pandemic and everything like that that created this? Or do you think it's because of also the inflation that came from it, and just tenants cannot pay anymore what they used to be able to pay before because of the rents? Like, the rents have gone in many markets up, market rents 15, 20%. And, there's a few that were not rent controlled that went up. There's also just the cost of living in general. Utilities went up if people were paying utilities. Gas, is just insane now. So, what do you think the backlog is mostly due to?
That's going to be a recipe of multiple things, because the Landlord and Tenant Board was falling apart prior to COVID. And that was for the simple fact that they were in-person hearings. Obviously, they only had it throughout the day, but they have contracts. So within these adjudicators, there was a length of a contract for these adjudicators. and there was a freeze on hiring public servants. So they didn't hire more people to keep up with the demand. And then COVID came, which obviously next day, the overall people coming on with the influx of people getting that message from Doug Ford stating to pay your rent, or don't pay your rent, put food on your table instead. So that now got the influx. And then they realized, hey, we need a new system. So now we have the new system from the portal and Navigate Tribunals Ontario. That's now has its learning curves because there's errors that is happening because of this new system. And obviously things have fell through the cracks and applications have gotten lost. So now they're trying to expedite those orders that actually got lost. So it's a recipe of everything, but it's overall shows failure on all levels of government not being able to properly serve access to justice to not just landlords, like tenants are suffering with this system as well. And that's where it's finally coming to light about this because they know that the landlords are leaving, their investments are leaving, but the tenants are also stuck in a spot dealing with unsafe living conditions.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a combination of many different things. And you are right. Like more and more people are leaving the industry, or I don't know if they're leaving the industry. Because I think if you're an investor and you're an entrepreneur, you're always going to do something. It's just they're not maybe putting their investment in Ontario per se. And a lot of people, I'm looking into, like, I obviously love Ontario. But, again, the midterm market, there's different strategies rather than going long term. I'm working on the resort and doing more recreational stuff. But, is it as lucrative to go long term in duplexes, single families? Like multifamily is a different story, but singles and duplexes, meh, probably not at this point in time. So, where are people going? They're going to places like Alberta. They're taking their money and they're going to Florida, the US, like Mexico, and these are a lot of them are well-known investors with a lot of investments, and they're liquidating because it's kind of like you squeeze, you squeeze, you squeeze, and at some point they're going to say, you know what, you don't want my money, you don't want my investments, I'm going to go elsewhere. And that's the thing with investors is we don't have to stay in one specific area. So if they're trying to do more and more to discourage us, which is what it seems like, that's going to be the consequences and the results. And I think in the long term, probably not even that long term, but there's going to be even less inventory and there's going to be more shortages. And what that's going to do to rents is, it's not going to go in the right direction. So what are what are
Got
some
it.
solutions that you think, or that maybe you've talked, because I know you talked to a lot of them about these things. What are some of the solutions that you would have proposed to them?
Well, it's almost like giving them the warning signs, it's here's the warning signs and letting them be very known to what the warning signs are with our investors leaving and letting them know they're in Portugal, Texas, Florida, Belize, Costa Rica. Like we're informing them that your landlords are leaving and they're leaving for multiple reasons. For the concept of a broken RTA, especially the Landlord and Tenant Board, we have vacancy tax spreading like wildfire. Landlord licensing is spreading like wildfire. And again, it's not going to benefit the tenants. It's just taking away, more funding from the landlord to invest, and or it's going to cause the rents to increase. Then and landlords have been on that pattern where they're trying to get out of long term, and they kept saying, "Hey, I'm going to short term." So what do? They're now going short term licensing, or they're preventing people who don't live in the city from having an Airbnb within the city. So if you see how you're trying to highlight where you as a government are trying to create a supply because everyone knows it's a supply and demand issue and they're trying to initiate, investors and developers to continue to build. But on the other side, they're not looking at the people who are leaving and they'll may say, oh, another owner is just going to come and take that property. No, they might just convert it into a single family home, bring their family over, especially newcomers coming in looking for the dream to own homes. But you have to see that there's multiple different ways for us to handle this, and it's about putting initiatives in to work with investors. Because when you have property standards and you have fire codes and you have all the rules and regulations coming down on a landlord, when our growing population of encampments are getting out of hand, right? And that's what they're not quite looking at. So for us as landlords, it's like, listen, our number one issue, as you can see through the stats, the Landlord and Tenant Board is going to be non-payment rent. So why are they taking so much funding and pushing it to the Landlord and Tenant Board, hiring adjudicators at $110,000 a year to deal with people who don't have money? it's like you got to give your head a shake. We are trying to say, instead of that, and looking at all the social agencies that are out there and local service managers who are, having funding to give to people who are in need of any type of rent relief. They're just trying to stock the landlord and tenant board just to deal with people with money. So we have to deal with the non-payment of rent, and we got to have a more streamlined approach for people who do want to get out of the business and be able to sell their property and sell it to an owner who wants to move into it. That will be the N12 applications that they need to be able to streamline. And if they don't, we're going to see more and more backlog at the landlord and tenant board, landlords who are not able to, gain access to deal with their tenant who is ruining the enjoyment of others. Why put them through this type of pain and suffering when they know that there's a lot of other places out there that are very friendly to landlords, and that which is obviously not causing any housing shortage in their area.
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, it's especially with not to get too political, but Alberta, and the new premier there, she seems like she's definitely welcoming and also, investor friendly in some capacity and doesn't take any of the BS. So, again, there's pros and cons to every market, right? Alberta has much quicker market cycles and ups and downs and that kind of stuff. Ontario had longer market cycles and it went up for many, many years. And where are a lot of the people moving to and where are the immigrants coming to? And you got to look at other factors as well. However, from a strictly landlord tenant regulation, I think Ontario is probably the worst up there with Montreal or, Quebec and BC, I think. What do you think?
Definitely. It's like, well, I say follow along with BC. BC is also another area who the tenants and the landlords are upset with the way that everything is happening. And guess who Ontario is looking at when they create these type of solutions? They go and look at BC. We want them knocking on Alberta's door. Hey, Alberta, we heard you have like no rent control going on. How's that working for you? And they will say it works great because they've done it in the past and it was not good for their community. So this is something that, as a landlord community, we have to ask for that too, not so much as removing full rent control, but making it fair for landlords to be able to adjust their rents accordingly, especially if, utilities are increasing, the condo fees are increasing. Our rent increases now are looming at 6.2%. Just in the city of Cambridge. So now they're actually talking about the region doing it above 8%. Now, with all these calculations of a rent increase, would this grant us above the guideline rent increase at the landlord and tenant board? And if so, we have all these landlords now that are going to file these applications and again cause more pain and suffering on the landlord and tenant board that cannot even afford to take on another application because they're unable to handle the influx of applications coming to them now.
Yeah. So what do you think? What do you think the solution even is? Like, is there a solution, or are we just so far in it that like getting out of it is just impossible?
They got to do it. If there's a solution, they have to implement it quick because we know how this is. Like it's a political ring. People don't want to get political when it comes down to housing, but you have to because these people are the ones making these rules and regulations for us to follow. And if they are going to make some changes, definitely big ones that could upset, tenant activists, are they going to do it right before an election? Probably not. So the one thing that we need to do is, have an N4 application where an N4 is given to the tenant that is uploaded into the landlord and tenant board system, into the portal to have a track record to say that this tenant received at least how many N4 applications. Tenants should have about 14 days to reply back to that application to say that they made a payment arrangement or they made payment to avoid the default order. And then a default order would be created if a tenant is not replying back or appealing that application. This is right now as everyone gets a hearing, no matter who you are, what application, if you agree to it or not. And it's taking up hearing blocks that could be used for more serious issues, especially for illegal acts or safety or tenants dealing with maintenance issues such as mold. So we really need to encourage that streamlined approach for that non-payment of rent. Same thing with the N12. If you file an application with the board and give it to your tenant, that should automatically get sent to the tenant to say there's an application filed for personal use. The landlord has provided the necessary documents, the affidavits to say that they plan to move into this unit for at least a year. And here is the T5 application, I believe it is, for the concept that you believe your landlord has served you this document if in bad faith. and inform the landlord that if you are caught doing it in bad faith, that it's $50,000 for an individual and up to $250,000 for a corporation. You're putting the information out there for people to make proper decisions before they act on certain applications. But if the landlord has the right to gain access to their property and the paperwork has been submitted, why are we holding back the landlord and tenant board and having a hearing, trying to justify that it was unlawful at that time?
Right.
So that is what they have to look for. And every landlord out there, you have to get into the rent reporting. The rent reporting is we can go slow. I've been doing this for 13 years. We've seen little baby changes, little ones, but little ones that we have, you have to get into your proper tenant screening
Okay, so
process.
let's talk about that. Like, what is credit reporting? Who does it? How do you do it? Why do you do it? Let's go into that first.
So people want to know rent reporting. They think they have to do it when the new tenant comes in. No, you can do this on your current tenants, good or bad. If you want to report your good tenants' payment history, you do need the tenant's consent to report their payment history, and they can give consent through the platform in order to have their good payments sent to the landlord credit bureau and Equifax. Now, if you have a bad tenant, even if they just didn't pay on the second of the month, you can report that. It gets reported to Landlord Credit Bureau and Equifax as a trade line. Be very careful on what rent reporting service that you have out there, because not all of them have that trade line power to impact the tenant's credit score. And all landlords should be looking at trade lines on their credit checks, not just the score. It's going to be very important for them to do that. And then when you have a former tenant who's been out of your unit for quite some time, left you with debt, you can report that up to going back 6 years. You can report that into frontlobby.com so that it gets shared with Landlord Credit Bureau and Equifax. Now you're going to say like, oh, we have a tenant. They already have shit credit, right? Like they don't have good credit. Like, why am I going to report them? It's not about just for the purpose of impacting the tenants availability. It's about informing your other colleagues in this industry to let them know that that tenant did leave you with a debt. And this is a way for you to stay connected to the landlord community, because when you do report a tenant's rent payment, it shows the landlord's name and it shows the email address. So you can actually keep track on if that one person's been reported multiple times. You all can come together and potentially use this as a fraud charge against the tenant being doing this. So that's why it's very important for us to be doing our tenant screening, which is obviously going to depend on how many landlords in Canada and the US are obviously doing their rent reporting, so that we can know who's paying rent on time, reward those people who are paying rent on time, but make sure that we now put consequences in place for the ones that are going to take advantage of this broken system.
So they go to what, frontlobby.com, is it, or landlordcreditbureau.com?
Frontlobby.com, and as you report to frontlobby.com, they share the data with Landlord Credit Bureau and Equifax on a monthly basis. So that will be shared in the middle of the month for the previous month.
And what do you need? You need their names, their birth dates.
Full name and birth date.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Make sure everyone get your driver's license. They got to get the ID from these potential tenants. I know it's a part of the skip in the process, but getting a copy of these IDs to make sure that you have their full legal name and the correct birth date.
And that it matches the credit report, and that you see it live in person as well, because a photocopy could be anything, right?
Mhm.
So compare all those things, because sometimes they're not all equal. And there might be cases where somebody's trying to pull a fast one, and that's, your control. The amount of control we have is based on the screening before the keys, get handed over. And so, but I do like this. And one of the things I would just say is, like, I think a lot of landlords, and like, again, not something I necessarily believe in, but a lot of current landlords will lie and say that the tenants were great and they paid on time to get rid of somebody. But I like the fact, and I think that's horrible, but it is what it is. I know you want them out of your houses. If they're not paying, it could be someone else's problems. But but go back and like file that they either owed you money or they left the place. Because if they damage the place, I think you could also put that in there as well.
You could put the rent and utilities without a judgment, but you will require an order for damages, because damages could fluctuate. So that's why the Landlord and Tenant Board always wants about 2 to 3 different quotes on damages. So that's why an order is mandatory. But your utilities, if it's in your lease for utilities, you can report the utilities as well onto Front Lobby.
And then it will send your tenants an email. Is that how the process works? Knowing that,
Sends an email reminding the tenants, hey, rent is coming due. Hey, you didn't pay your rent. There's now a late. This is how it's going to impact you. I just got a tag this weekend from one of the members there in the group, and she's like, this is how front lobby works. And the tenants have replied back, I'm sick and tired of these emails.
nah, just
So
pay,
like,
man. Just pay on time.
and you know what? Like when they get to see reminders of just how their credit is impacting, and knowing that landlords, as landlords, and knowing what we're dealing with in Ontario, that you have no other choice but to step up your screening process. You have to make sure that you're taking someone with something to lose. You know, some people, we don't mean to be picky and say you got to have a minimum of a 650 score. Like it sucks that it's like that now, but hey, it's not us. It's our decision makers that are forcing us into this corner to do so, because we want to be able to give someone a second chance, but unfortunately the system is tipped against us.
Yeah. I mean, if we take a chance and then we're stuck with 8 to 12 months of waiting for a hearing, you know, the screening has to be even more and more rigid. Like even now that I'm adding, so in my screening, like, which I have a very thorough screening process, and people can still slip through the cracks, but I think even just the marketability or marketability of that renter for future renters is also important. So here's an example: if you've got a young couple and down the road you want to sell your house, or I don't know, it's just something you need the house back, they will likely find a house faster than maybe somebody with like 3 dogs, 2 cats, 5 kids. Like I'm not saying that like I'm not renting. I have lots of families and they're great with kids, but always as you're screening tenants, what is the marketability of that future tenant should you need your place back for whatever reason?
Yep.
So because there's not a whole lot of opportunity. There's not a whole lot of rentals out there right now. There's going to be less and less over time. And so, I mean, you hear a lot of stories, people selling, and then, the tenants can't find anything because, other landlords are being super, super picky, and they should, because it's where we're at this point in time. So obviously front lobby is a good tool. Do we have any other tools that we can use, or is that basically it right now?
Well, you have Canly. Canly is where they've uploaded previous orders that are on the sites from the Landlord and Tenant Board, and just like that, it's been delayed. They don't people have
I think
delayed.
6 months out here, right? 6 months delayed?
Oh, even probably further. And they don't even put everybody on, right? They don't even put everybody on Canly to actually check it, but that's always a good thing to do. People have also got to look at, their Facebook. You got to Google their name, because some people are like, they can see some crazy stories that after they got the tenant in there, what they come up after they're done Googling their tenant. So it's definitely a part where landlords have to do whatever they possibly can, and connecting with landlords through your local landlords association as well is such a positive tool for us to have, because you can get advice, you can get tips from them, and you can also know who's in the area, who's had a bad experience, and hearing from people on how to handle it, because you can do all the checks. And like you said, there will be someone that comes in underneath your nose, and sometimes it's about a good tenant gone bad situation. In that case, you got to really have that skill trait of dealing with people and their characteristics, and knowing when to say things and when not to say things, but always keep your emotion out of it, because that's the part that bites our landlords in the ass.
Mm. I feel like a lot of newer landlords, they fall for the sob stories, and then they get stuck, and then there's going to be a sob story against why the tenant can't pay the rent, or a sob story why like when somebody with a sob story is probably going to have a sob story for everything moving forward. So just careful. And I like to say, like, yeah, like you said, it's a business at the end of the day. Like, yeah, we want to provide good housing and nice housing to nice families, but it's still a business, and we're not doing this for free. We're doing this to create wealth, to build something. And if it's not in Ontario, or if it's on Ontario currently with long-term tenants, it'll be somewhere else, or it'll be in a different strategy. Or there's lots of there's industrial real estate, there's commercial real estate, there's recreational real estate. Real estate's real estate. It doesn't have to just be residential. And so, as things happen and as things move, you can pivot along the way and strategize and do different strategies. And I think that's where a lot of landlords are starting to reconsider is, do you go into a different strategy that makes a little bit more sense for the times that we're in? Is rent to own potential strategy now? Maybe, I don't know. is industrial. Like light industrial is a really cool strategy, and there's no RTA.
Well, that's where they're pushing people to go and explore and, getting themselves into like certain stocks that they want to get into, or literally just call it a day, hang their hat and let someone else take it over or whatnot. But be surprised of how many landlords call me, and knowing where they started off, like, and how those red flags of tenants that they got into the place, or how they never even properly served the tenant, on the second of the month. Like, sorry guys, like, don't be waiting 3 months to go, "Hey, my tenant stopped paying. What do I do?" It's like, did you not do anything in 3 months? Like, come on." So the education is very crucial, and a part of our advocacy is also working with the finance and trying to talk to the finance minister to say, these landlords associations are very severely underfunded, or non-existent. We do need to create more education for our landlord community. I'm glad that they have a podcast like yours to listen into, so that you can bring them to the right tools and to get the right information to help them as they navigate through this crazy world of real estate in Ontario. But it's still good. You gotta have a hard heart and run it like a business. Like, don't let anything influence you, and go with your gut. And so many people don't.
Absolutely. What about you? Like, are you currently still acquiring? Are you kind of just managing what you've got, working on, the business with Ontario Landlords Watch? Like, what's 2023 have for you in store?
Well, I'm not too sure if I should be building a triplex or building a bomb shelter. So I'm not too sure. Maybe the bomb shelter underneath the triplex. I'm still a little confused on that. Even about, analyzing, hey, I got a triplex. We have room for a fourth plex in there. Do I start that renovation right now? Or do we take my single family home that I live in and turn it into 3 units? Because the province is obviously knowing the importance of supply. And then I take off to Dominican. So everything's up in the air. And again, the numbers have to work. And I am staying away from areas that do have landlord licensing, just because it's not my cup of tea. And I'm not going to feed into this cash cow of a scam that, they think it's going to be good for the industry. And eventually they're going to be able to announce it to say that, they're not going to do it anymore, because they see that more and more people have more opportunities elsewhere. So I'm going to hover down and see what happens. But I just, all my properties have been cash flowing beautifully. And, we just paid off my triplex. So
Nice.
it was pretty good to have that feeling. I told my husband, I'm like, I want to put the door red. And he's like, I'm like, yeah. When, like, I think it was in Ireland. It's like, if you pay off your property, the door goes red.
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
he's like, I just put that door in. We're not doing that.
That's awesome. I mean, but it goes back to show that, like, it is about time in the market, not timing it, staying for the long course. This is a
Yeah.
long-term thing. And, the rates are extremely high right now in comparison to what we were used to a year and a half ago, or a year ago, 6 months ago. But, again, it's temporary. Are we going to see, 1% and 2% again? Probably not. Are we going to be around the 4%, like, which is probably an average? Yeah. I mean, at some point, I think it'll come back down, unless their plan is to own everything and for us to own nothing. I don't know. We'll see.
Yep.
We'll see how it all plays out. But I know, what, I still think Ontario is a great investment market. I think it's just, you got to maneuver through it differently today than you were doing before. What worked even 2 or 3 years ago does not work today. The rental strategy. So, like, to me, there's like investment strategies, like the BRRRR strategy, and, whatever, like flipping, rent to own, blah, blah, blah. There's all those strategies, but then there's also rental strategies, student rentals, long-term, short-term, mid-term. Like, you have to play, you got to mix and match them to see what makes sense in today's market. And something does make sense. It's definitely not what it used to be 2 years ago. 2 years ago, different things made sense. But now with the higher, rates, the increased cost of everything, the rent controlled units, all that stuff, you've got to improvise and play with what you have. There is still option, in my opinion. There's still
Oh
opportunity.
yeah, it's more like, what property do you have that it's not doing a cash flow nicely, but you can now flatten it to the ground and rebuild? Let's look at that option. But even for you, when you talk about midterm, like, I've never had that one. I got short term and long term, and I'm like, I see your stuff, and I'm like, I gotta sign up, and I signed up for your course to listen to the midterm, and I'm like, I missed it. I don't know what I was doing, but I totally missed it. Like,
It's all virtual online, so all the recordings are there.
Oh, okay. So I can just listen in.
Yeah, just watch the recording. But here's the beauty of it is, I mean, I've been doing it for 3-4 years, just without officially dubbing it as midterm. But it was a lot of my rentals that were like a month, 2 months, 3 months at a time. And these are homeowners, and I want to repeat, homeowners in transition. So they're either doing renovations to their property, they're in between homes. It's corporations that are placing and relocating their employees that are probably homeowners prior. So it's a whole new side of things. Yes, it's not short term per se. Could it, go to the board and, if somebody wants to play that game, absolutely. This is why screening the tenants is important. This is why I really emphasize on these are homeowners. They're corporate clients, they're executive clients. I have people that have stayed almost 6 months because they were waiting for a pre-construction home to be done. They sold their home, as an example, and they were kind of in between. And they're amazing tenants, and they pay a premium. So I usually will get about double of what I would get for a long-term tenant. And they're nicely furnished units. They're, they come with internet and all that stuff. And I've had great success with that. And that's, to me, that's that sweet spot where I don't think, I mean, again, I never know for sure, but I don't think they're coming after midterm anytime soon. It's like, the 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. Yeah, no,
We'll leave
exactly.
this section out, guys. You did not hear that.
But at the end of the day, there's a lot of bylaws coming with short term, and there's too much tenant control over the long term stuff. So do I go into recreational, which I have already? I'm doing the resort and all that kind of stuff. That's that's separate. Do I go into commercial? Do I go into light industrial? Do I go out of country, or do I also look at midterm? And midterm seems to me, for many of the properties, the residential properties, a good market or a good opportunity, a good strategy. Again, it's not going to be for everybody. It is a little bit more hands-on, but I also have the ability to make calls, build the relationships. We've got like great relationships with people from the film industry, healthcare, you name it. So I love it. Again, is it going to work forever? I don't know, but is it working right now? Absolutely.
You know where Airbnbs came into, or short-term rentals came in to save the day? Through COVID. And then as soon as COVID's done, they're like, let's do some licensing on these people. Let's do some prevention on this. And even for a natural disaster that's happening in the States right now, where are those people living? They're living in short-term rentals. There's a need for short-term rentals within our community. And instead, our elected officials are looking at ways to prevent it instead of highlight what's been driving people to short-term rentals. Is not just for the cash flow to it all. It's really because they've created a system that's just not workable anymore. And it's sad to see where our elected officials, our government, has damaged, social housing, government housing, and unable to scale, unable to have funding to maintain it. And then here landlords are just doing their thing. And now we have Big Brother looking at us, telling us, no, don't be doing this. Then don't be crying when we got no supply.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think you said it great. I mean, yes, a lot of people have done short term for cash flow. I think now it's very saturated. It's not it's not as cash flow positive as it used to be. Again, it's still a great strategy, but it's almost more now because they want to keep that control. They want to keep the opportunity not to have to wait 12 months to get a hearing if there's a tenant that doesn't pay. Or like you said, the other option is they sell and they go elsewhere, or they go into different, market type. They go into Alberta, or they go into, commercial or something different that's not part of the RTA. So again, you pigeon, you close the doors, we're going to be resourceful. We're going to find something else. And if it's, unfortunately not in Ontario, then it's not in Ontario down the road. I still think it's okay. Hopefully they come around and they're like, we're going to help landlords, because the best thing to do would be to incentivize us rather than punish us. And there would be more supply. There would be a lot more.
Respect us as a business. Respect us as a necessity, as a business. And to know, like, you just bail out the airlines, how come you're not even looking at your housing providers? And maybe it's the landlord and tenant name, which everyone has. That's what we've been looking at. And then tenants go, oh, the land and the lord. And I'm like, listen, it's homeowner, housing provider, resident, tenant, whatever you guys want to call it. The fact is that they know they need this section. They know they need the private sector to help them. And we're screaming from the rooftops to tell you what we need, what tools we need in order to help them. So if they don't do this, then again, we're going to see the mass exodus, like I've already stated right at the middle of COVID, is that there will be a mass exodus as soon as they prevented landlords from being able to do a rent increase for that year after, as well as, shutting down the landlord and tenant board. And now you have Section 83, which, tenants are using that to their advantage, of using that towards trying to avoid or delay their eviction. So we have to start putting ourselves in. It's like that shoplifting experience where, the price of product goes up based on the amount of losses that this company is having, especially through shoplifting. And landlords, we got to get creative. Times are tough. You got to look like, are you doing ceramic tile? Are you doing sticky tile? Are you going to be putting your fridge, stove, washer, and dryer on a rental contract separately from your rental agreement? Only provide one car parking, even though there's two. Now that second car parking is now on a contract, that rate can now increase, which prevents them from, being able to utilize this. We are very creative individuals, and we're asking our government to work with us, set us at the table, stop listening to developers all the time, because you have a management issue with your housing as well. And you need to have someone oversee the landlord and tenant board to make it run more efficiently than what it is. Because if you continue with this is where landlords start to go rogue, and so does the tenants. And it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. I mean, like, imagine if you have a tenant that doesn't pay rent and they're supposed to pay, let's call it 4 grand, and it's not in a corporation. Like, and I'm not saying to do this, but you hear these tenants or these landlords changing the keys. And they're like, take me to court. I'll take the fine. Because sometimes the fine is less than, having to wait those 9 to 12 months with no rent payments. And I'm not saying that that's okay, but you're like, when you're saying go rogue, that's what we're hearing out there.
Oh, it's the discrimination part of it, is who they're accepting, trying to explain to elected officials that through my experience of doing this for 13 years, and how many landlords have accepted people on OW, no DSP, and what they're saying now is a totally different story. They used to be people on fixed income used to be prime. Like, landlords wanted that because it was fixed income. They had it guaranteed. That has now changed. Now we get into our short term, and even though people are coming into short term, it does meet that need, especially people in between houses, or if they did get evicted, they're using it. But if they start stating that short-term rental is their permanent address, this is where things get hairy once again. And then you get yourself into, trailer parks. People are working themselves into a trailer park type of rental state right now, or turning their units into storage. They rather have their place rented out as a storage unit. So we do have a lot of different creative ways that are coming about. They're coming. It's just a matter of time. And now is the time for our elected officials to act. Because if they don't, things are going to get a lot worse, because they're not going to do it right before an election.
No, I mean, you've been doing this for how many years now?
It'll be 13 years in July. So we got it online. We've always put our paperwork to landlord and tenant board saying, hey, we want to get our hearings online because it's preventing our tenants from showing up. And then it gets adjourned, and they give a reason why they couldn't, take an hour bus ride to Waterloo. So they said that they were going online well before COVID, just COVID kind of hensed it up. We got local service managers on the Navigate Tribunal site, so that links tenants to where they can find funding, which is great, because if they get funding, the landlords are going to get it. And now we're just working on to their workload of what they have, what applications they have. And we gotta clean it up, because that L10 application, bringing a former tenant to the landlord and tenant board to go after any type of damages, rent, or utilities, it's pointless. You have to find out where they have moved. So skip that process, take it out of the board, and just make sure you put the information on the website where landlords can report that tenant's debt to front lobby.
Absolutely. You know what I also, and I think we're going to wrap up after this, but what I also think really messed up the system is the cash for keys. Because cash for keys, people did that in the beginning, get the tenants out, whatever they needed to do, renovate, blah, blah, blah. A lot of investors did it for the larger multifamily. But the issue that it's really created is now that the renters know that it's a thing, and they start extorting and saying they're not going to do this, or they're not going to pay, and you give them cash for keys and this and that. And it could be thousands of dollars. And a lot of landlords are doing it instead of having to ride the court dates and wait for that time. But it's created already a really bad precedent that people now are renters are expecting cash for keys, and I refuse to do it. I refuse.
Yep. And you know what? We used to have that as our little like, did you offer them a month or two? Instead of dealing with the craziness that can come from a landlord and tenant relationship. And then it went into, hey, I just pay my tenant, this much money and they're gone. But again, even if you sign that on 11, even though you have a cash or key situation, the tenants can dispute it to say that they've signed it on under pressure. They can still try to find it at the landlord and tenant board. And again, I'm with you on, because it became a normal, is that I would rather give it to my paralegal and pay to wait it out than give it to the tenant. And if I did have to give it to the tenant, similar to like you sold your house, closing date's coming, you had no other choice, I would try to talk to CRA and just let them know that
100%. 100%.
Deliberate there. This is the concept where this is the information that tenants should be aware of, that if you're a landlord, if you do take this money because you're extorting your landlord, that they do have that option to make an anonymous complaint, or not anonymous, just tell them straight up, I gave this tenant some money.
You can report it to CRA. I think this is like fairly new, like from like I remember seeing something maybe prior to the pandemic or whatnot that like you should be reporting it to CRA regardless.
Yeah, you should be. Like you're going to write it off as a loss, and obviously they need to know where that money is going. And I'm sure tenants are not going to be giving that information to say that this money was now. And we're not talking like, $6,000. Like we're talking 20, 30, $35,000. People have been offered $100,000 in order to have their tenants leave. Enough's enough on that. It sucks, even with the cash for keys situation. And we still have a backlog the way it is. Like that's ridiculous. So maybe that's where we see a decrease in applications based on what their stats have stated this year. Normally it's about 80,000 applications. They're now trying to say it was about 35,000 applications for the last year at the Landlord and Tenant Board. So if we did see a decrease, maybe it is that cash for keys resulting into these evictions where you don't have to go to the board. But we have to stop it and try not to do it as a community, because it's just going to be, you got to recoup that cost, and that cost is going to go on to the next good tenant, sadly. And this is what's going to really keep buckling our housing system.
Is there a way, because I know you're in with the guys at Front Lobby and Landlord Credit Bureau, to allow the landlords to just write a note on that future or that tenant's profile that there was a cash for keys done?
There might be something where there could be
talk to them, because I think it doesn't have to ding their credit or anything, but that way the future landlord knows that the only reason that tenant left for I don't know, whatever the reasons were, was a cash for keys situation, and it might make you think twice. Did the tenant didn't pay, so there was some cash for keys to get them out rather than going to the board? The house gets sold, the tenant didn't want to move, so there was a cash for keys situation. I think we should be able to put that in there to help each other out. Why not?
Little toggle to say settlement reached, something along the lines like that. So if I see settlement reached, we have a problem going on here. But you're going to see it though too. Like if you're doing rent reporting on a monthly basis, and this is now affecting the credit of that tenant, when if you do come to a mediation agreement and you take it off, it's still going to have its impact on that tenant's credit from having it delinquent for so long. So
but not even with an N4. I'm just thinking like for even for example, like an N12.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you had to do cash for keys because the tenant didn't choose to cooperate. It would be nice to know. Or like, because if the landlord did it willingly, like I'm guessing they're not just going to go ahead and put that cash for keys, that they've done it on the platform. But if it was coercion, right? I mean, let's put it on there and help each other out. So Kayla, I know you're in with them. See what you
got. The feedback. That's the feedback, girl. Like, and I tell you, if anyone actually has this is an opportunity to get my crazy ideas on my head and bring it to a fantastic team at Front Lobby to say, this is what we need. This is what we want. This is what we need. This is what we deserve. Please give it to us.
No more cash for keys, guys. No more, because this is setting the bad precedents. But if you are going to do it, report it to Front Lobby.
Or CRA.
And CRA especially, yes. But both of them. I think both of them, if we can do Front Lobby at the same.
Tell the tenant you're doing it though.
No, exactly, right? So, but we should be doing whatever we can in our control, because we don't have a whole lot. Anyways, Kayla, where can my listeners reach out and find out more if they had questions or they wanted to see more of what you're doing?
Yeah, they can come on Facebook. It's Ontario Landlords Watch members. It's make sure that members part's in there. There's about over 9,000 people now in the group. So put a request in there, say that you heard me on Sarah Larby so we can get you into the group quicker. You can add me on Facebook. I'm almost up to my max of 5,000 people as friends because every time I do a podcast or a stand-up interview or event, I'm always really wanting to make sure I reach out to our members because we know how it's like to be shadow banned on Facebook. And I want to make sure that I'm getting you guys the information that you need to know about the industry. Because when the call to action happens, I'm going to need as much support as I possibly can get so that we can get the changes that we need for this industry for good landlords and good tenants.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Kayla. Any final last tips for landlords listening to this right now?
Get out of Ontario. I'm just joking. Always make sure it's educate. Get yourselves onto many different platforms. Look at your landlords associations within your area. Sign up with frontlobby.com. You can use the code OLW15 to get a $15 credit. So your first credit check is going to be free. So you can do credit checks with Front Lobby as well, not just the rent reporting. And then you'll be able to check out their new collect feature as well. So that's going to be something to really help you save some money and make sure that you're holding your tenants accountable. But make sure you know about all the tools that are in this in Canada so that you can better protect yourself and your investments.
Amazing. Kayla, thank you for being another appearance and also just as great every time you come on, lots of energy. And thank you for all you do. Thanks for helping us investors, landlords, and having a voice for us and fighting for the last 13 years. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to Where Should I Invest with your host, Sarah Larby. Make sure to listen in next time. We'll catch you on the next episode of Where Should I Invest?